I'm going to go out on a limb and say that when you see a romance cover, you know it, but your answer on what a romance cover looks like might differ depending on what generation you're from. Hi, my name is Marissa. I like to talk about books and book design, and today we are going to be exploring the evolution of the romance cover. Regardless of your age, I think we all have some sort of idea of the ripped bodice romance cover. There's actually a name for covers like this, and that is the clinch. The clinch is the name of the style of, the scantily clad woman being held by a half naked or sometimes even full naked man. You know, the tender embrace full of longing and yearning. And right now I'm using the gendered terms male and female because when this became popularized, it was primarily heteronormative white couples that were featured. But I'll start to get into some diversity later in the video. This style of romance cover was popularized by the author Kathleen Woodiwiss, who is sort of the mother of the modern romance book. You could argue that authors such as Jane Austen were writing romance novels. However, Kathleen's the one to write the first bodice ripper romance novel. She wrote her first book after realizing a lot of adventure novels didn't feature female protagonists, so she sought to do just that, and she sprinkled in some romance along the way. And by romance, I mean on-page sex scenes. Very different from Jane Austen. These were coming out in the 70s alongside the women's rights movement, which sought the equal rights and freedom of women. One of those freedoms being sexual freedom. It's no secret that these romance novels featured women's sexual desires. Many of them challenged the sort of Puritan societal norms from the early 1900s and well before then. Thus, these romance novels became a safe space for women to safely explore their sexual desires, which I think brings up an important note that these romance novels almost immediately became flagged as being women only. And what happens when something becomes thought of as being made for women? Men come along and shit on it and critique the value of it. American librarian Nancy Pearl said, "Literary fiction is always judged by the best examples of it, and romance is always judged by the worst." I think it's safe to say that is true. Romance as a whole has never really been taken seriously. These covers definitely did not help. I think if you asked most people today, they would say that they would be embarrassed to be caught reading one of these in public. Me personally, I think they're awesome. I cannot even lie to you. I heavily fuck with these covers. If you don't know, they made these by first staging an elaborate photo shoot, most notably with the model Fabio, who has been featured on over 460 novels. He sort of forever became tied with the romance genre, which is really interesting considering he hasn't really been featured on these covers since the 90s. But anyway, they first staged the photo and then they would have an artist come in and paint the photo, typically with oil. So they would paint the models and then they would go in and add some elaborate scenery, something very romantic and staged. Yeah, I think these are awesome. But what's not awesome? When they started replacing the paintings with photos. I mean, let's ask the audience. What's better? Not the photo. Not the photo, I'll be honest. In my humble opinion, these clinch covers lost 100% of their value when the designers discovered Photoshop. Wow, it is rough. But unfortunately, these photo-based covers became more and more popular in the 90s and early 2000s. On the bright side, we also started to see more diversity in covers. Authors such as Beverly Jenkins wrote romance novels that featured Black characters on the covers, and authors such as Cat Sebastian wrote romance novels that featured queer characters on the covers. And actually, a lot of the sort of traditional romance authors favor the clinch cover because it really honestly advertises what is in the novel. What you see is what you get. But it also has the opportunity to show the reader their identity represented in these characters, which then brings us to the rise of the modern romance cover. Even as recent as 2011, 2012, can I say that's recent? Anyway, 2011, 2012, about a third of romance covers featured unclothed characters. And I kind of skipped over this, but another really popular trend was to show just the torso of the characters, which almost more so hinted at the steamy nature of these books. But by 2016, only 18% of covers showed unclothed characters, and in 2019, it dropped to 10%. By Clinch. I think romance covers started to showcase emotional intimacy rather than physical intimacy. Why is that? Well, did you know that as a whole, Gen Z is having less sex than prior generations? That is true, actually. I did not make that up. The reason behind that is for a different video made by someone that is not me, but I do think it is a very interesting and probably relevant connection. It's also important to note that general fiction also started to see a shift towards brighter, more graphic, and abstract covers. Again, in 2011, 2012, only 7 of the 169 covers featured on a list in Publishers Weekly featured illustrated covers. But in 2018 is when we really started to see the shift towards not only illustrated covers, but the sort of illustrated abstract covers. 18% of covers were illustrated in 2018. I want you to guess the percentage of covers that were illustrated in 2023. Seriously, guess. 72%. That is insane. That is well over half of the covers that were published. I don't think they're all abstract necessarily, but they are illustrated. If you've just been into a bookstore recently, you know what I'm talking about. So that is definitely another reason that we saw this trend in romance covers. So getting back to talking about the trend in romance specifically, I think one of the reasons we saw this is that it in general made the genre more approachable. A reader who thinks that the iconic clinch covers are corny and embarrassing is much more likely to be caught reading, for example, an Emily Henry romance book cover. Right? Like that is just, it's undeniable. And when comparing them side by side, the modern cover looks a lot more cute rather than sexy. But I beg you the question, is that necessarily a good thing? Well, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of those traditional romance authors favor the clinch cover because it very clearly advertises what you're going to get when you pick it up. And by that, I obviously mean the sensual nature of the book. But you might not get that impression from the modern romance cover. In fact, you might not even know that the characters are supposed to be in love. Take Beach Read, for example. The characters are on opposite sides of the cover and they're not even looking at each other. That is a stark difference from the clinch covers where you see the lovers embrace. However, I would argue that the cover of Beach Read does a good job of showing the initial reluctance of the two characters to get together. So, in that scenario, it's a little bit of a coin toss. But I think another issue, and possibly the biggest issue with the rise of the cutesy illustrated romance cover, is that romance and smut and everything in between sort of gets lumped together. I have seen literal children reading books such as Icebreaker that feature very graphic sex scenes. And really, can you blame them? Compare Icebreaker to Check and Mate. Check and Mate is a young adult romance novel. What's the difference? Seriously, there's no difference. They are the same. I do think there is a little bit of an issue there that needs to be addressed. Throwing it back to those traditional romance authors I've been mentioning, a lot of them have issue with the blobby character style we see a lot of. That's because it's harder to showcase diversity. I mean, seriously, all of the blobs, they look the same. They are literally blobs. However, as a reader myself, I know a lot of people prefer the blob characters because it sort of makes it easier to leave the characters up to their imagination rather than seeing an actual person on the cover. They feel forced to imagine them while they're reading, which I think that's fair. However, as an artist myself, I don't like these blobby characters because I think they're ugly. That is obviously subjective. I do like the OG bodice rippers, so you could argue that I have questionable taste. So, what's the future of the romance cover? Well, I am just one girl and one graphic designer, so I can't say for sure, but I do think we will continue to see a rise in diversity. At least I fucking hope so. In 2020, we actually saw one of the first significant jumps in the percentage of covers that feature characters of color, and that is mainly due to the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. However, in 2023, that percentage only went up 2% to be 22% of covers featuring characters of color. I'm not sure what we can do as readers other than support authors of color and buy their books to show publishers that we prioritize diverse characters. Other than that, I'm personally hoping we bring back some more detail into these covers. I think we've gone just a little bit too abstract. I definitely don't want to go back to photo of the character on the cover because there's actually nothing worse than that. But I think we can add a little bit more detail into the abstract style. One cover I think that does a good job of this is Just for the Summer by Abbey Jimenez. It's still the sort of flat, abstract illustration we've been seeing, but there's a little bit more details in the landscape and scenery. If nothing else, it makes it stand out on the shelf compared to all the other covers that sort of have the same blob looking character on it. But who knows what the future holds. As a reader and a graphic designer, I am so excited to see what new trends start to emerge. And if you are interested in hearing more about the history and upcoming trends of book cover design, then you should subscribe to your girl because I love to talk about that. And with that, I leave you with one question to leave me below in the comments. What is your favorite romance book cover? Please, please, please let me know. I'd also like to know if anyone likes the illustrated bodice rippers or if I'm just some freak. Am I a freak? I don't know. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for all the love on my channel. I love chatting about books with you guys. So with that, signing out, but I hope I'll see you in the next one.